This past March 2nd, two young men were walking down the street on a Sunday night. 22-year-old Victor White and his friend had just left a convenience store called Hop In the town of New Iberia, Louisiana. New Iberia is a town of about 30,000 people. It's a couple hours west of New Orleans. And as Victor White and his friend walked down that road in New Iberia, about 11:30 p.m., a police cruiser pulled up alongside them. According to a police report from that night, the officer was looking for a couple of people who might have been involved in a fist fight at the Hop In. The report says that Mr. White consented to a pat-down by the officer. That officer found marijuana in Victor White's front pants pocket. The officer then reportedly ran the men's names through the police database, and then he called for backup. Mr. White's friend says that when the second officer arrived, the backup officer arrived, police handcuffed Victor White and placed him in the back of the first car. They read him his rights. They then searched him again. It was during that second search that police say they found cigars on him and a small amount of cocaine. He said apparently that he was going to use the cigars to smoke marijuana. According to the police report, Mr. White said both the cocaine and the marijuana belonged to him. Police officers dismissed Mr. White's friend. They said he could go home. He walked back home, but they kept Victor White. They drove Victor White to the sheriff's office for further questioning. And what happened next is very unclear. Much of this story is unclear. But the next series of events are particularly woolly. And then the following day, on March 3rd, the Louisiana State Police posted this press release on Facebook. It says, quote, "Once at the sheriff's office, Victor White became uncooperative and refused to exit the deputy's patrol vehicle. As the deputy requested assistance from other deputies, Victor White produced a handgun and fired one round, striking himself in the back. Victor White was then transported to a local hospital by ambulance where he was pronounced dead from an apparent self-inflicted gunshot wound." An apparent self-inflicted gunshot wound. After he'd been searched twice, he miraculously still somehow had a gun on him or found one in the police car, and then he used that gun to shoot himself in the back while he was handcuffed. Victor White's parents tell NBC News that when they arrived at the police station, they did not know the circumstances of their son's death. Victor White's father is a Baptist minister. He tells NBC when he was finally led into the morgue, he performed last rites on his son. He also says he was not allowed to view his son's body below the chin. Local headlines in Louisiana that week read, "Man kills himself in backseat of Iberia Parish deputy's car. State police investigate in-custody death of Iberia Parish man." Well, 2 weeks ago, the Iberia Parish Coroner's Office met with Victor White's family and told them that the initial conclusion by police was correct, that it was a self-inflicted wound. In fact, it was suicide by a .25 caliber weapon, according to the coroner, which is important because it's not the .45 caliber weapons that are typically issued to these officers. In a press release yesterday, the coroner said this, quote, "The manner of death is suicide." The coroner says his office has a policy of not releasing details on deaths by suicide to the public, and so there's been no public release from his office of that full autopsy. But that full report has now been obtained exclusively by NBCNews.com's investigative unit. Reporter Hannah Rapley got that report by way of pictures taken by Victor White's family. They photographed it page by page and sent her these photos. And it's a complete report, and then NBC News can post it. But the takeaway here is that some of this report directly contradicts what the Louisiana State Police said back in March. The autopsy states that although the police said Victor White was shot in the back while his hands were cuffed behind his back, the autopsy says he was actually not shot in the back. He was shot in the chest while his hands were cuffed behind his back. The autopsy says the bullet entered his right lateral chest and exited under his left armpit. So think about that for a second. He's handcuffed with his hands behind his back, and somehow he obtains a gun in the backseat of that squad car, even though he's been frisked twice. And then somehow with the gun, he's able to shoot himself while handcuffed from behind in the chest. In his press release, the coroner offered an explanation for this. He said it was possible for Victor White to pull that off because of his physical build. Quote, "Due to his body habitus, he would have been able to manipulate the weapon to point where the contact entrance wound was found." As Hannah Rapley reports today for NBCNews.com, Victor White's family says they're not convinced. His father tells NBC, quote, "You can't make me understand how my son took his left hand when he was handcuffed behind the back and shot himself. I don't believe a thing they're saying at this point." Families still awaiting a final report from the Louisiana State Police investigation, which is separate from the coroner's investigation. But they say, quote, "The only thing we want back is our son." Joining us now is Hannah Rapley, the NBC News investigative reporter who's been covering this story since the shooting, and she's the one who obtained exclusive access to the full coroner's report. Congratulations on this scoop, Hannah. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So first, let me just ask you, I am new to this story because of your reporting. Did I get anything wrong in describing it that way?
No, I mean, you pretty much told the whole story. And when it first happened, very few outlets covered it. As you noted, there were a few sort of blotter-like items in the local press. But and I started reporting it that same month. But because there were so many questions and so few public documents available, I had to spend the next 6 months now trying to get as many documents as possible and speak to as many people that knew him as possible.
Can you explain the term the coroner is using here and what that argument means? Body habitus, the idea that Victor White's body habitus somehow enabled him to fire a bullet into his chest while his hands were cuffed behind his back. From the coroner's perspective, what does that mean?
Well, I'm not quite sure because I was never able to get an interview with the coroner's office. He does say in the report and in the press release that based on all of the information that the investigators and the pathologist, the forensic pathologist gathered, that he deemed the death of Victor White a suicide. One thing that particularly struck me about the report was that the coroner noted that Victor White had lacerations on the left side of his face. Early on in my reporting, the Iberia Parish Police Department told me that he had not been involved in an altercation with police that night. And the friend that I interviewed that was with him the night that he was stopped also said that Victor didn't have marks on his face. So that seemed to imply to me that maybe there was some type of altercation, but it's not clear. The other thing that really was important in that report was that the coroner noted that investigators told him that Victor White had somehow said something along the lines of, "I'm gone," before officers heard the gunshot, which indicated that it was a self-inflicted wound, that it was suicide to him.
If the police and now the coroner contend that it was a self-inflicted wound, that he himself fired a gun into himself to end his life, why is it, or do we have any understanding, in fact, that the coroner didn't actually test his hands for gunshot residue?
According to the documents that I received, his hands were not tested for gunshot residue. There was residue in the wound itself. And when I went back to the coroner's office to confirm whether I misread or, missed something, they referred me to the state police, and the state police were unable to confirm whether his hands were or were not tested for residue.
Hannah Rapley, investigative reporter for NBC News, who turned up previously unknown information about this case, which is now getting, we should admit it, national attention of a kind it probably would not have before, both because of this new information and because of the Ferguson, Missouri upset over Michael Brown's death. I want to thank you for walking us through this, Hannah. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. We've got links to all that detail in those reports at mattoblog.com tonight. Okay, Debunction Junction, a really good one. It's coming up next. Stay with us.